Powerful and seen as a staunch conservative, Nayef Bin Abdelaziz is now the new crown prince in Saudi Arabia. But just what does it mean for the future of the kingdom and the region? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Hazem Seeker. Well, Prince Nayef Bin Abdelaziz has been Saudi Arabia's interior minister for decades, but while his brother King Abdullah is labelled a reformer, Nayef is known as a staunch conservative. We'll talk about what it all means, but first, Tarek Bazley has more on the man who could become Saudi Arabia's next ruler.
Seen here at the funeral of Crown Prince Sultan on Tuesday, Prince Nayef Bin Abdelaziz has held public office for close to 60 years. He's the son of King Abdulaziz, his mother from an important tribe. He's regarded as one of the Saudi royal family's influential Sadairy 7. Described by some as an anti-reform conservative, he became the governor of Riyadh when he was just 20 years old. He's been the interior minister since 1975. His job to keep the kingdom politically stable and prevent the sort of upheaval seen in the wider Middle East. And for the most of the time, this is what he did. The bombing of a housing compound in Riyadh in 2003 brought him face to face with the work of Al-Qaeda.
There is no crime more brutal than the crime that has happened here. It happened in our nation and against our nationals, against Arab Muslim residents.
He saw the group as a threat to security and directed his forces to hunt down active cells. At the same time, he's believed to have made use of traditional tribal networks and the clergy to counter the group. His role as Interior Minister also saw him involved in organising the annual Hajj pilgrimage. The death of more than 250 pilgrims in a stampede in 2004 provoked these comments.
The Interior Ministry at the time of the Hajj always takes all the security measures it can for the safety of the pilgrims. This year, as in all past years, we hope we can win the confidence of the pilgrims in this matter.
Prince Nayef has also been in charge of the country's secret and religious police. He's known to oppose giving women the right to drive or vote. Only last month, a woman was sentenced to 10 lashes for breaking a ban on female drivers. For many years, Prince Nayef had backed the Yemeni government, in particular its efforts to combat Al-Qaeda. But earlier this year, he opposed granting full support to Yemen's President Ali Abdullah Saleh as he tried to fight off a revolt. The injured president was later allowed to recover in a Saudi hospital before eventually returning home. Prince Nayef also played a prominent role on the international stage, here attending an Arab League meeting last year to discuss measures to combat extremism and organised crime. In March, Saudi soldiers were sent to neighbouring Bahrain to help crush pro-reform demonstrations. The previous week, Prince Nayef had visited the kingdom and had commented that Bahrain's security and stability were integral to that of Saudi Arabia. A leaked US State Department report described the prince as a conservative pragmatist convinced that security and stability are imperative. It goes on to describe him as elusive, ambiguous, pragmatic, unimaginative, shrewd and outspoken.
The most important particular characteristics about Prince Nayef is he's a very patient man. He takes his time before making a decision. He analyzes the situation. By nature, he's skeptical. He would like to look at the various angles of every particular issue before taking a final decision. But the most important particular characteristic is patience.
At 78 and reported to be suffering from diabetes, it's not certain he'll survive long enough to rule as king. But as Crown Prince, he may well continue in his role as Interior Minister and could take over the now vacant role of Defence Minister, a move that would further consolidate his position as one of the kingdom's most powerful men. Tarek Bazley, Al Jazeera.
Well, for more on this, I'm joined by our three guests. From London, we have Saeed El-Shahabi, a political analyst specialising in the Gulf region. From here in Doha, Michael Stevens, a researcher at the Royal United Services Institute. Michael has co-authored a commentary on the death of Crown Prince Sultan and what it means for the House of Saud. And joining us on the line from Jeddah, Hussein Shabokshi, a Saudi journalist. Gentlemen, welcome all three of you. Saeed al-Shahabi, if I could start with you. Now, it's not a surprise at all among Saudi watchers that Nayef has been installed as the new Crown Prince. And is this something that reformists in the country should necessarily be concerned about?
Thank you very much. I think Prince Nayef has been known for the past 4 decades as a hawkish personality who would advocate the use of force if necessary to maintain security, and also he thinks that security and stability are linked to each other, and as such he would always adopt a military option in order to crack down against dissidents. Now, for reformers in the Saudi kingdom, I don't think they will be very pleased to hear that yet another person who is in his late 70s would take over the role of security, as they have always been set upon whenever they presented a petition or called for reform. So I don't think there are great news for those who are seeking reforms through the existing regime and personalities.
Michael Stevens, I mean, as we mentioned, he's seen as a conservative, a hardliner, but he's also won praise from Western governments in particular for his crackdown on Al-Qaeda in the country. Where does that put him then in terms of his perception outside of Saudi Arabia? Because is he hard to pin down?
I think there are two aspects to this question. Firstly is the character of Prince Nayef himself, now Crown Prince, and also that of his son, Mohammed bin Nayef. Now, Mohammed bin Nayef is, by all accounts, quite well received in the West. He's considered well-educated, eloquent, and a very shrewd operator, particularly with countering Al-Qaeda elements within the kingdom, and also other dissidents, particularly coming across the Yemenite border. I would say with regards to the father, Nayef himself, there is some concern in the West about his conservative tendencies. But I think in general the analytical community and also the policy community do feel that the trappings of power might well smooth some of the harder edges off of Nayef's conservative personality. For example, when he first was made aware of the 9/11 attacks, he denied that there was any Saudi involvement. After a short briefing with American security personnel, he actually did change his position. So he's not necessarily unamenable to Western policy and Western thinking. Yes, there are concerns, but I would say that when he comes to power, should he live long enough, of course, that we shouldn't be overly concerned about him becoming a radical hardline conservative. And I certainly don't think that Western governments are overly worried in that respect. I certainly haven't heard anything from the corridors of Whitehall that would seem to indicate that they are overly worried about him taking the kingdom in a radically conservative direction that might be antithetical to Western ideals. With regards to reforms, I don't think there's any particularly widespread belief that he will roll back some of the reforms of King Abdullah. He may not push some forward, particularly with regards to women's rights and also with some, I would say, interlocutor capability with the Shiite community. So I think in terms of the progression of the kingdom from Western eyes, we shouldn't be overly concerned at this point.
Hussein Shabokshi, we heard you a little earlier in the profile that we ran of Prince Nayef at the top of the program, saying that he is a very patient man and that every decision he makes is done with patience and deliberation. Does that suggest then that he has this pragmatic side to him, and that if and when he succeeds King Abdullah, he may not want to roll back the reforms made under King Abdullah? Not only that, but that he may temper some of his conservative positions once he has the trappings of power.
Well, it's been the tradition in Saudi Arabia that every monarch builds on what has built before him, what has been built before him. This is no secret. The Saudis have been accustomed to seeing every monarch come and build rather than destroy and start something anew. There's a continuity aspect of ruling Saudi Arabia, which has been taking place in each era. And I do believe that Prince Nayef has been an integral part of every decision, every reform decision that's been taken by King Abdullah. And after all, Prince Nayef is a vital member of the government in Saudi Arabia, and he is the Minister of Interior, and the Saudis realize very well the weight and the significance of the Ministry of Interior in their daily lives. So he has been an integral part of every policy-making decision by the king.
Michael Stevens, if I could back to you on this. Crown Prince Nayef is known for his forthrightness, and he's known among some people for having some, I should say, unreconstructed views, particularly on the position of women being allowed to vote in Saudi Arabia. How are liberals and women going to think of him in power, particularly when he said back in 2009 that he didn't believe women in Saudi Arabia needed to vote?
I think there is concern, and as your first guest indicated, there are worries regarding some of the reforms that he may or may not be part of implementing in the kingdom. I think certain liberal elements, particularly in Riyadh and also in the Hijaz area in Jeddah, have had quite some, I would say, long-standing hostility to Nayef. Of course, more liberalising princes such as Talal bin Abdelaziz have been very outspoken in terms of their opposition to Nayef regarding human rights issues, reform issues, and of course women as well, although women have not had the same political platform within the kingdom to express opposition to Nayef. Nevertheless, Nayef is aware of that opposition. Often in the press he will make veiled statements pertaining to wanting stability from certain sectors of the population that he regards as, I would say, wanting to seek reform. So in that regard, I would say he will use his purview with the Ministry of the Interior and his very strong security presence within the kingdom to, I would say, prevent widespread reform happening from the ground up. Now, whether this translates into whether there should be genuine fear amongst certain sectors of the Saudi population, I think to some extent that is justified. People have been jailed for speaking out, particularly this year. In the Day of Rage, planned for March the 14th, there were a number of young men who were arrested. And I think that is a cause for concern. But I would say at this point that he's not going to turn into a tyrant. Let's not jump the gun here. I think he's well aware that to ensure stability in the kingdom, he can't take a purely security-focused line of action.
Saeed al-Shahabi, have people been too quick to label Crown Prince Nayef as a conservative, or does he just have this reputation of a tough man simply because of his post as Interior Minister?
Well, I don't think people have just jumped to conclusions. They have had him for the past 40, 50, 60 years of working within the establishment. Now, I think when he becomes, or if he becomes, the ruler of Saudi Arabia, I think he will be the wrong man at the wrong place and at the wrong time, because the Arab region, the Arabian Peninsula, is facing a lot of mobility towards reforms, towards the establishment of democratic institutions, and Saudi Arabia is far behind that move. We know that Saudi Arabia has its neighbors, including Bahrain and Yemen, on the move towards establishing a democratic systems, and that the Saudis have so far, despite the enormous talking about reforms, has really undertaken no such reform. I can't see any real reform in real life. There is hereditary dictatorship, where you have the king, and then when he dies, his crown prince takes over, and then the lineage of rulership continues. And now I think the Saudi system itself suffers from several problems, including internal and external. When you have in the Arab world the Arab Spring sweeping the Middle East from Bahrain to Yemen to Egypt to wherever, you can see that the Saudis are worried about what's happening around them. Internally, the line of succession is also troublesome for the Saudi system itself. Now, for Nayef, if he becomes the ruler, I think he will be probably, I would believe that he will be in a different era altogether. I think democracy is sweeping the region, despite the counter-revolution that is taking place, headed by the Saudis in Egypt especially, and even in Tunisia.
All right, let's put some of that then to Hussein Shabokshi in Jeddah. The wrong man in the wrong place at the wrong time. That is what Saeed Shahabi says about the new Crown Prince. What do you say to that?
I think this is an overstatement. The Saudis are keen on maintaining stability and maintaining status quo in the sense of leadership. This is important to them. Because of the turbulent neighborhood that we live in, the reform process has to be properly led. A gamble at this stage in Saudi Arabia is a very risky one. And I do like to emphasize that all the examples that were compared to Saudi Arabia are very different. Saudi Arabia is a much younger country. It's a newer country. The other countries that are facing the changes in the Middle East have a longer history, have a more established political history even, that they can use it as a collateral for future changes. In Saudi Arabia, it's a much riskier process. And that's why it needs reliable, trustworthy leadership.
Michael Stevens, if we broaden this out here and talk about succession issues now, every king of Saudi Arabia since 1953 has been a son of the first King Saud, but the surviving sons are all well into their 70s and 80s now. At some point, there's going to be a shift to the next generation. When and in what form do you think that would happen?
I think it's unlikely to be the next option for Crown Prince, and here's why. Your previous speaker alluded to stability in the kingdom, and I think that's exactly where the House of Saud will go in terms of trying to create a smooth transition to the next generation. So I think the key runner right now would be Prince Salman, who is governor of Riyadh, who some people are now saying is next in line for Minister of Defence. Interestingly, above former Crown Prince Sultan's son, Khalid bin Sultan, which shows you some extent to which I would say certain individuals within the House of Saud in the younger generation have perhaps lost some of their influence in this process. So I think first of all we'll probably be looking at Prince Salman, who is 73 years old, so he may have some time left on his side, depending on how his health turns out and how long he is able to live. We could be seeing, I would say, a transition to the younger generation, probably somewhere within around 15 years. Then you'll be looking at, I would say, Nayef's son, Mohammed bin Nayef, who by all accounts, as I've already said, is very well regarded, is a shrewd operator, is very against corruption within his own ministry. And he certainly would have a very strong chance. You also have Nayef Bin Abdullah, who is the commander of the Saudi Arabian National Guard, who is the son of the current king, who I would say right now is not in as good a place as Mohammed bin Nayef for a run at the throne. I think it's important to emphasize at this point that neither Khalid bin Sultan, Mohammed bin Nayef, or Nayef bin Abdullah currently have the widespread support within all the branches of the family to launch a power, I would say a bid for power. That will have to take some time, and it will play out over the next 10 years, I think.
Hussein Shabokshi, given that, I mean, you mentioned earlier that Saudi Arabia is a very young country, and given that more than 50% of the Saudi population is under 30, isn't it more important now that power should begin to shift to a younger generation to reflect that?
Well, we are seeing that in a typical Saudi-style pace. We are seeing the inclusion of some of the third-generation members of the royal family in certain key positions. Your guest has just named a few of them, Prince Mohammed bin Nayef, Prince Khalid bin Sultan, Prince Nayef bin Abdullah, and Prince Abdelaziz bin Abdullah in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We have some governors in various provinces in Saudi Arabia and regions. So this is becoming an accepted norm. Now, they will go up in the leadership structure, no doubt, and they will have more portfolios to handle, for sure. And there is a kind of acceptance now that within a decade, 2 decades, we might see a king, a monarch from the third generation in charge of the country. That is not an impossibility.
Saeed Shahabi, is Saudi Arabia a country under siege right now, given all of everything that's happening in the region right now, with all of the various uprisings, particularly in Yemen and Bahrain, right on the country's doorstep?
Well, I think the Saudis are worried about what is going on around them. They have their army occupying Bahrain. So Bahrain is a country under occupation by the Saudi army. And I think it will take them a lot of thinking on how to get, to get disentangled from this problem, because I think the crisis in Bahrain is likely to continue, but is unlikely to subside, even within the presence of the Saudi army. On the other hand, you have the crisis in Yemen. And again, even in Yemen, I don't think the situation in Yemen will return to what it was or it has been under Ali Abdullah Saleh, and Ali Abdullah Saleh will have to go sooner or later, and then Yemen will have to develop into a more democratic system. When we see that, of course, the biggest of all is Egypt, which is the largest country in the Arab world, and which is on the step of either going forward towards reform and towards democratization, or could be brought back to what it used to be under the military junta. And that will, of course, if it happens, will have serious repercussions on the whole Middle East, because I don't think the Egyptian people would like to see their revolution overturned in any way. So I think the Saudis have, this is of course in addition to the internal problems within the Saudi regime, whether it is with regards to the minorities or with regards to the women or to the new generations that is watching what's happening around them with interest. And I don't think you can isolate Saudi Arabia from the rest of the regional powers and the states. And as such, I think the Al Saud House are looking with some worry on the events that are surrounding them, especially with the diminishing American enthusiasm to support these monarchies forever.
Michael Stevens, we talked earlier about the perception in Saudi Arabia of a need for stability above all else, and that any type of change has to come at a very incremental pace. But we have seen the tide of change that is sweeping through the Arab world right now. Will they really be in a position to control any of that and for them to have it all in their hands?
Yes, I think they will. I think that there will be certain areas of the country that will be more difficult to control. Now, just remember one thing with Saudi Arabia. There is a considerable conservative element amongst the population, particularly in the Al Qasim area, who have actually caused the Al Saud some problems when they enacted reforms. So it's unlike some other countries in that the strength of the conservative movement and the conservative clerical establishment in Saudi Arabia actually behooves the monarchy to go slowly in terms of its reform process. Will it be able to hold the kingdom together? Certainly now, yes. I mean, they have plenty of money. They have over $450 billion of currency reserves that they can use at any time to enact social reforms. Indeed, they have done so this year. So I think right now, in the short term, certainly, they will be able to control aspects of unrest in the kingdom.
That's going to have to be the last word. We're out of time. I want to thank all three of you for taking part. Good discussion, gentlemen. Saeed Shahabi in London, Michael Stevens in Doha, and Hussein Shabokshi in Jeddah. Many thanks for your time. Thanks for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. As always, we welcome your comments and suggestions. Just email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.com. Latest news is up next. Bye for now.